So the speech I'm going to be refuting today is that the 1.5 million estimated deaths of Armenians in the early 20th century at the hands of the Turkish was indeed a genocide. My opponent's main or secondary claims were that the Ottoman Empire wanted to rid themselves of ethnic minorities, that the government of the Ottoman Empire was heavily involved in the genocide, and that the Turkish government has been aided in keeping the events from being labeled as a genocide. So to begin with, I will refute the first claim that the Ottoman Empire wanted to rid themselves of ethnic minorities. Turkey denied that the Ottoman authorities attempted to exterminate the Armenian people, and they do acknowledge that many Armenians died in World War I, but they also stated that Muslim Turks died as well. According to historians in a Q&A discussion on BBC News, massacres were committed on both sides. And my opponent stated that many Armenians were killed, but left out any evidence of Turkish people being killed, so as to say that all the deaths were one-sided. Turkish authorities also claim that the number of Armenian victims have been inflated. According to American historian Justin McCarthy, Western publications use partial statistics that are based on concrete regions only. Second claim is that the government of the Ottoman Empire was heavily involved in the genocide. My opponent said that the murders and deportations were systematic, and although this may be true, the Turkish say that they were provoked by Christian propaganda in Asia Minor at the time, and this is supported by a New York Times post in 1896. And his second support for this claim was that the Armenians as an ethnic race were targeted. However, the Turkish people did not just single out the Armenians, they also went after other ethnic groups such as the Serbs and the Balkans, and they claimed that this was all in self-defense because ethnic violence also killed the Turks as well. About 1 million Turks were killed during the Balkan Wars and World War I, and Charles King, who wrote Ghosts of Freedom, says that since no country recognizes this behavior as genocide, it is unreasonable to call what happened to the Armenians with similar proportions genocide. The genocide claim is just being used against the losing side in World War I. At this point in his speech, my opponent briefly talked about soldiers who were trying to instigate a massacre. However, this is little proof that the majority of the deaths that happened weren't just a result of international conflict and war. Finally, I will refute the claim that the Turkish government has been aided in keeping this event as being labeled as a genocide. My opponent lists threats made against other countries, as well as the political and economic standings as reasons other countries may want to stand by Turkey. However, he makes this claim without any proof and doesn't list any countries where this is the case. And although this may be true of some countries, it is definitely not true of all. Yosef Shigal, who is a retired Israeli parliamentarian, says that he finds it offensive that the Holocaust of European Jewry during World War II is compared to the mass extermination of the Armenian people, because he says that the Armenians provoked Turkey while the Jews were killed just because they were Jews. American historians such as Justin McCarthy and Charles King, who I mentioned earlier in my speech, also stand by Turkey, and Australia does not view the events of genocide even though they were fighting against the Ottoman War at the time, or the Ottoman Empire at the time. And finally, although this point that the Turkish government has been aided in keeping the events from being labeled as a genocide, definitely do state that there's some controversy on the subject, it does not prove that the massacre of 1915 was indeed a genocide. Thank you.
Well, John, it's all organized very clearly and easy to follow. On the first point, you start off immediately by noting that Turkey is denying this claim, so we know that there's some controversy on it. You've got a citation of a couple of historians here that talk about how there were massacres on both sides. Turkey claims the large number of Turkish Muslims were also killed, and basically it's an argument here that this was all part of a provoked conflict that was going on, and it occurred in the context of the war, and it's not necessarily the systemic process that is being suggested by the advocates of the belief in Armenian genocide. So I think you did a pretty good job at least summarizing what the position on the other side is and giving us some reason to listen to the argument there. On the second point, there's some reference to a variety of people who died in the war. I mean, we got 1 million Turks killed. Serbs and Balkans were also targeted in this circumstance. I think there's an argument here that says that no countries at the time were perceiving it as genocide. There should be a little bit more of an explanation about what constitutes a genocide, and is this terminology something that is universally applicable. I don't remember if the advocate had a discussion of that, but it seems to me like the conventions that define genocide on an international scale occurred well after these events, and so trying to retroactively apply the definition might be a little bit problematic, and from a legal perspective it might matter. The other question is, why is it important one way or the other? And I think that you need to press the advocate on a demonstration about why labeling it a genocide is of critical importance. And then on the last point, basically, the notion that no countries are siding because Turkey is intimidating them in some way, shape, or form. I thought there was an interesting argument that suggested that it shouldn't be equivocated because there was a war going on and it was provocation. It's not the same thing as the genocide that took place during World War II. So we've got some label that is attempting to distinguish those things. And then the example of Australia, I think, is an interesting one as a combatant in the war, as opponents of Turkey in that war, that they did not perceive it as being genocidal. I think that's an interesting perspective. And why is that a more valuable perspective than the other side? Or explain that the other side's perspective is, biased based on some ethnic loyalty or prejudice or something like that, as opposed to a more objective determination by other nations. And maybe that should be the argument here, that the standard of definition here should be how it's perceived by the world, and so far the world has not perceived it that way. All right, thank you.